9:30ish?
Yes.
9:30, okay. Okay, next we'll do the safety brief. If you just throw up the slide, please. Here we go. Just take a moment to read that, please. Okay, next we'll go to the comments from the public. And John Nooney, please. And just like to remind everybody, there is a three-minute time limit. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I am John Philanthropic Resiliency Nooney, 835 Bascom Road, City Council District 4, CPAC Planning District 3, School Board District 3. And I just want to share with you, we now have our official JEA. Sure. Now I know what you're all thinking. Who will be the first JEA board member to get a shirt? And let me just say there is precedent. You know, this goes back a number of years, but it was on Hogan's Creek. And we did a drawing, you know, and it was using Jacksonville City Council speaker cards. And the drawing was out of a shopping cart. But going forward, you know, with the River Accord and septic tanks, you know, we'll be hopefully doing a drawing and using a septic tank as from where to draw from. But anyway, the reason I'm here, and I'm just trying to see how much time I have left, but this is a workshop. 2 days ago, Jacksonville Waterways Commission meeting. And in the agenda, River Accord Task Force. So the River Accord, I participated in it 10 years ago. It was almost $1 billion. And, you know, it's an intergovernmental agency, you know, and, you know, a number of partners. And the key with that is, you know, with the River Accord and JEA being one of the biggest partners, you know, there was, you know, 4 barometers, you know, within that River Accord, you know, water quality, public access. And, you know, and I get back to our place. And let me just say, you know, I'm on Pottsburg Creek, you know, a Category 1 wetlands next to a FEMA house. And the potential for public access couldn't be easier. Now, as you all may know, I participated in this Resilient Jacksonville thing, you know, October 2023, just 7 months ago. I'm in this thing 4 times. And when you open up the book, you'll see Jacksonville today. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, today. Visit Jacksonville today. And let me just say, 90%, you know, and you can ask Sandra Fettner, Daryl Joseph, you know, Jill Enns, the park, 90% of the waterways in Duval County is private. Only 10% is public. Now, I'm on Pottsburg Creek, next to the Arlington River with 3 private rowing clubs, 0 access. Dumps out to Exchange Club Island, then you got downtown. And I'll tell you, the access is horrible. So I am hoping that that JEA, our community, when this stuff moves forward, that you can be a sponsor. And let me just say, the last meeting I was at, you know, the JSEB, you know, Todd Rubin, we can now make a movie about this, believe it or not, a documentary. You know, call it McParks, but it is the most positive thing that could happen. So I need a sponsor, and, you know, I'm not giving up. If anything, you know, let's just have, you know, we should be embracing this thing. So I've been to JTA, you know, and, you know, but anyway, there's a host of potential, you know, sponsorship opportunities. And, you know, the biggest one can really come from the Jacksonville City Council. And maybe Mr. Boylan wants to talk about that potential opportunity. Where's the clock here? I don't even see
5 seconds.
5 seconds. You've been great. Yeah. And we'll see you next time around.
All right. Thanks, John. Okay, and now let me ask Councilmember Boylan for any comments, sir.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I had a chance to have an extensive conversation with MG Orander As you know, he's going to be joining the board. He was approved by the council at our meeting Tuesday evening. For those of you who know MG, he's going to be a great addition to this group. I know how critical thinking he is and his interest in participating in this. So I think he's going to be a great asset to this board. Other than that, our focus is on all stadium all the time. So I'm here to just to quietly listen today.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And again, appreciate your representation from the council here. Okay, so I think it's time to go ahead and start off with our workshop here. And who do I turn it over to first? Okay, please.
Good morning. I'm Lori Whitmer, Director of Budgets, and I'll get us started with the overview of today's agenda for our 25 operating and capital budget. We'll start with enterprise planning overview, then our consolidated system review. Then we'll do a deeper dive into each of our systems, the electric system, the water, and then our DES, which is our chilled water system. The workshop will cover details of our budget. We'll have several team members presenting today. There will be breaks in the presentation for questions. We'll get started with Julie Crawford with enterprise planning.
Great, thanks, Lori. We're continuing to progress through our first round of the enterprise planning process. We established the strategic direction, we created long-range plans, and then we presented the supporting plans, and then we used those to inform a 3-year business plan, and ultimately, this proposed fiscal year 25 budget. We presented the long-range financial plan back in January, and it's shown in the picture on this slide. The theme remains the same within the 3-year business plan. We are projecting flat electric sales and modest water sales. We're increasing the O&M spend to support operations of new facilities, especially in the water system. We're focused on the capital plan, and what you will see today will allow for growth projects, continued renewal and replacement of our infrastructure, and projects that will allow us to comply with environmental regulations. The proposed plan meets our financial metrics, but it does require new debt and additional revenue from both rates and growth. We want to make sure to identify and quantify the things driving the need for our additional revenue. Both Vogtle units are now online, which is over $200 million in operating expenses annually. There is a need for capital projects driven by aging infrastructure, growth, and regulations. And inflation and supply chain constraints exacerbate the costs of all of these projects, and not just capital projects, but our operating projects as well. While many of those items are difficult to control, we've made strides to mitigate some of the expense increases. We have a robust fuel hedging program that has saved over $100 million over the past 5 years. And we will be as strategic as possible in the structuring of the new debt to ensure generational equity and levelize annual debt service payments. Over the past couple years, we contributed $246 million into the non-fuel purchase power rate stabilization fund to allow a slow drawdown over future years to soften rate needs. And we took a very hard look at our projects, and we've prioritized and made timing decisions to levelize capital spend as much as possible. And finally, we are bringing in outside business excellence consultants to provide cost-saving recommendations. We want to make sure we're very clear and transparent with our plans for rate increases. For the electric system, we need $34 million more in revenue in fiscal year 25 than in the 24 budget. Since sales are forecasted to be flat, this will need to come from rates. Our estimate on impact to a typical residential customer is about $8 a month. And looking back through history, typical residential bills have increased annually at 0.9% since 2015, and that includes this proposed rate increase in 25. Moving to the water side, the water system will need $28 million more in fiscal year 25 than 24. And some of this will come from additional sales, and the rest will need to come from rates. The estimated impact to a typical residential customer is $4 a month. We have not raised these rates since 2011. We did raise capacity fees in 2022, but that only impacted new development. So as a point of reference, in 2011, our capital spend on the water side was $92 million. Our fiscal year 25 budget is 6 times that much, and that's mainly due to growth in the system and necessary renewal and replacement. Currently, the combined JEA residential bill is one of the lowest against our Florida benchmarks, and with other utilities proposing rate increases as well, we anticipate to remain in the lower quartile. While we've mentioned that we are not anticipating selling more electricity, we have seen a steady increase in customers, about 2% a year. And this may seem like an odd dynamic, but really electric use per customer has reduced greatly due to conservation and energy efficiency. We've added 30,000 customers since 2021, and we anticipate 33,000 more by 2027. These customers require additional operating expenses to support them. And the water system has growth in sales and customers, adding 27,000 since 2021 and looking to add 23,000 more by 27. And similar to the electric system, this requires additional operating expenses to support the growth of the system. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Pleasance to represent procurement.
Thank you, Julie. Earlier in the presentation, supply chain constraints came up as a major cost driver for JEA. And it's true. We've seen it very recently with big items like transformers, construction projects, and wood poles. But we see it every day on even smaller scale projects locally like landscaping. The supply chain department fights multiple battles every day with market disruptions, aging infrastructure, new regulations, a limited supply base, and more. The good news is we're well fortified. We've established good supplier relationships. We have the ability to adapt in an ever-changing market. We're aligned well with our business partners. We have strong terms and conditions and well-governed policies and procedures. And we are working to become even stronger by diversifying the supply base and improving the tools we use like data analytics, risk plans, category management strategies, contract management. The idea of stability in supply chain is harder and harder these days. But the team here at JEA remains prepared and ready for what's next. And I'll turn it over to Lori now.
This is our first section, so we'll pause here to see if you have any questions.
So one comment just on the IT, and we'll discuss that a little bit more at the board meeting coming up on the 25th, just so the board members know about that. I know we'll get into it, but for the increase in the electrical rates, do we account for low-income customers? Or is this just across the board, the $8 roughly increase?
Right now, it's across the board based on a certain assumed bill. As we get into the year, so these will be proposed to be effective in April. So as we get into the year, the rates team will do a cost of service study or use that information to really dig deeper in and give final recommendations. This one's just first glance estimate at what the impact will be to give you an idea.
Just to add to that, we plan to come in the fall with those details of the impact to the different classes.
Thanks.
Joe, if I might interject from the perspective of the city, obviously we are focusing a lot on supporting families, particularly with financial challenges and providing, money for their JEA bills as part and parcel to that process. So I think if we can offset some of that through the actions of the city, and there's wherewithal between not only them, but with the nonprofits, United Way and others, we're creating an effort to try and support their needs.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Okay. So next section is on our consolidated system overview. So here we have the historical actuals, 21 through 23, our 24 budget, and notice that for 22 and 23, it is higher, and that is due to our fuel and purchase power. Highlighted in orange is our 25 consolidated operating budget, and that is $1.994 billion. That includes electric, water, and DES. Then we have our forecast for 26 and 27. We'll be talking more about each of these operating budget components throughout the presentation. Here's an illustration that breaks down our electric and water operating budget components into the dollar. So for every dollar a customer pays for electric and water services, this is where your money is going. O&M, fuel and purchase power, and the current year capital funds are your three largest expenses. Here's our government transfers via the JEA bill. We have our history, 21 through 23. We have the current year budget and the 25 budget. The total in 25 that's budgeted is to the city of Jacksonville is $286 million. That's the sum of the city contribution, public service tax, and the franchise fee, and $64 million to the state of Florida. That includes the sales tax and the gross receipts tax. JEA's general contribution agreement is currently being renegotiated. So for 25, a budgeted placeholder, an additional $15 million to the 23 contribution was budgeted. Then a 1% increase year over year for 26 and 27. In addition, under this new agreement, JEA will use a different methodology to calculate the split between the electric and water funds in 25. In 24 and in previous years, the system was based on calculated on a millage calculation. And that split was a 77 for electric, 23 for water. For 25 and beyond, we're now splitting the budget based on a percentage share of our GAAP revenues of the previous completed year. The resulting split of that change is a split of 71 now electric and 29% water. This methodology better aligns with JEA and how other utilities in the state make the split.
How did you decide on that split? I mean, what?
The split is based on GAAP revenues,
Okay.
and we use 23 revenues,
Yep.
and it was based on what we're seeing amongst other utilities.
Okay.
Can we go back to the previous slide? You may have said it, I'm having trouble hearing, but the city contributions going from 123 to 137. And I know that's a plug number because you're in negotiations with the city, but that's a huge increase. And I don't think that should happen without this approval of this group, not just as a approval of a budget, but of a specific item. But can you explain how we go up 10%?
Yeah, so the basis was using 23's amount, and we did add 15 million, but it is a placeholder because it is under negotiation.
Okay.
We need to have something in the budget, but it is not final.
Excuse me, to follow up on the allocation percentage, we looked at Fitch ratings, we looked at various other methodologies. This unit sales is complicated. It's hard to reconcile. We wanted to simplify it basically. So something the city auditor can look at and verify in a couple of minutes as opposed to the past.
So how is the Fitch calculation? What's the thought
So
process there?
the thought process is we'll take the audited numbers from E&Y and use the percentage total revenues for each system. So electric divided by total revenues, water, wastewater divided by total revenues. Apply that percentage to the total contribution amount.
Okay.
So it's turned out to be about a 5% decrease in electric, increase in water.
Which line item are we talking about?
The city contribution line. So you see the 137.4 for,
How's
What?
it divided? It's not.
oh, how would that be divided? Based on the 23 audit, it would be roughly 70 2% electric. And we have a slide coming up on what the electric and what the water numbers are. I think it's roughly 98 million for electric, but we'll see the exact number.
And Joe, you're saying the revenue is and that includes fuel?
Yes.
That's crazy.
There's going to be some fluctuation in fuel, but again, that is the total amount that we're collecting from our customers. That was the basis of the calculation.
And remember, the water, we're in different counties, whereas electric, we're basically in Duval County. So we get the benefit of other counties paying.
And Mr. Baker, back to your question about the negotiation with the city. I mean, if the board would like for us to make sure that you approve however the negotiation works out, I don't think that would be an issue. I'm looking over at the lawyers and my boss, so, but I'm getting some head nods, so.
Yeah, I assume that was part of the process. Is that a bad assumption?
No, sir.
Okay.
I think that's what would be the way that we would do it anyway, but just
Good.
say the words out loud.
Yeah, okay, good.
All right. So next we have our labor costs. For 25, the total headcount is increasing 1.5%. That is 35 positions. The base payroll expense for 25 is increasing 7.9%, which is 20.5 million versus 24 budget. Payroll expense includes bargaining unit step increases per their contractual agreements, estimated general increases for our bargaining units and appointed employees, general increase budgeted at 3.75%, and bargaining units at 5.25%. I'm sorry, and appointed at 5.25%. Benefits, 24 versus 25, is going up 0.8 million. Pension has increased 15.9 million. That includes the employer portion of defined benefit and defined contribution. The next slides, we have a deeper dive into our salaries and benefits with Pat Malis.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I'm Pat Malis. I'm the Director of Employee Services. And so as Lori mentioned, there are some influences that are impacting increases that we're seeing. And a large component of what we're seeing in the budget actually is salaries and benefits. Some of the factors influencing those include the continued low unemployment rate that we're experiencing here in Jacksonville. It does have an influence on our ability to attract, retain employees. So that is, we have a very highly technical workforce. So it is sometimes a little challenging to attract those individuals and retain them. We're also continuing to see the consumer price index hasn't, it's leveling off, it's lower, but it still has been increasing. And then remembering that 77% of our workforce is actually in the labor unions. They're in a collective bargaining agreement. And so, as Lori mentioned, we're in the last year of our contract with the bargaining units. We will be negotiating contracts starting after October of 24 into 25. And the unions right now have an agreement. 4 of them actually are going to be at 3.5% of an increase. And then, as she mentioned, the Professional Employee Association consists of all of our more highly skilled engineers and professional level employees, and they are going to be getting a 5% increase, which consists of a 3% performance budget as well as a 2% general increase. And those particular jobs do influence or push against the appointed jobs, I should say, because that's where we do get a pipeline of our employees matriculating into the company and up. So that does have an influence. We also have within all of the union contracts that were negotiated a CPI accelerator. So What that means is the CPI accelerator is provided if the average CPI for 12 months, a 12-month period, exceeds the negotiated increase for the year. The delta will be provided at a maximum of 7%. I don't anticipate that's where we're going to be in the next 2 months, thank goodness. But if it were above 7%, we would be paying that in lump sum. So right now, we're trending at about 3.6, so it's about 0.1% above what we were anticipating, but we have 2 months remaining, and we're hoping to see that level off a bit and get us down where we anticipate. So as Lori had mentioned, the proposed budget for the bargaining units is 3.75, and that is to accommodate for a potential increase in that CPI. And then for PEA, the appointed, and M&C, it's 5.25%. And again, that is to mitigate that potential cost. All right. The other component that we talked about that's a large aspect of the budget is actually benefits. And for fiscal year 25, we're estimating an increase of 123 million. That's up 107 million from this year. The benefits currently consist of 13 different categories, with 2 of the largest being the pension and what we our self-insured medical plan. Pension plans are administered by the city of Jacksonville, and they consist of the general employee pension plan as well as the general employee defined contribution plan. There is a very small population remaining with JEA that are in the SJRPP, Systems Employee Retirement Plan, and we actually administer that ourselves. There's about 67% of our employee population is currently enrolled in the general employee pension plan. That's referred to as the GEPP. And then 43% are enrolled in the newer plan, the GEDC. That one went into place October 1 of 2017. So all new employees go into that plan. And that's what you may hear referred to as the 401k style plan. So that's a newer plan. And then the most recent actuarial analysis for the plan forecasts an increase in JEA's contributions by $16 million. And the GEPP, that older plan, represents 75% of that cost. And the primary reasons for the increase, there has been a reduction of the assumed rate of return for the GEPP from 6.625% to 6.5%. And the lower assumed rate of return increases the actuarial accrued liability, leading to higher required contributions. There's also the adjustment to the actuarial assumptions, including withdrawal rates and projected salaries, and then the differences in actual experience versus what was projected. And this includes mortality rates, participant turnover, employee retirements, and salary increases. And there may be additional adjustments to the projected return. If this is followed, the accrued liability will grow until the pension surtax revenue begins to be credited to the plan. And that, I think that's estimated at around 2030 when that will actually hit. The other component of the benefit cost is the self-insured medical plan. And we put that particular model in place in 2009. This model requires JEA to absorb the majority of the risk, financial risk, but has resulted in a year-over-year cost savings. The savings is passed on to the employees and the retirees by having lower than industry trend premium increases. The plan is required to be compliant with Florida statute, and what that means is that we are required to offer to all of our retirees the option to enter into the plan at retirement. There are about 317 enrolled retirees and about 6,000 participants total. The retiree premiums, they pay 100% of the premium. However, the claims that are paid on their behalf are about 1.5% greater, or $1.5 million greater than what they actually pay in as a premium. So it is costly. We absorb that cost. In addition, to mitigate a lot of this, we try to make sure we have an award-winning wellness program. You've probably heard about that, and that is primarily to help our employees with early prevention and early detection of illness. The fiscal year cost of the plan is going to be approximately $27 million. This is an increase of $4 million from previous years, and that's a significant portion of that increase is because of approximate $3 million due to a change in our forecasting method. And I'll turn it over to David.
as you can see, our budgeted headcount from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 21 was flat. We had a potential sale in there. We had a pandemic in there. And when you think about that number being flat, our trending was actually, we were squeezing. When you get to 22, we had just come out of a situation where the city had offered an early retirement. We were looking at that, we were trying to anticipate. And so when you look at 22, we had a spike in both our budget and our total headcount. When you look at 23, we expected another bigger spike, but we actually slowed it down in terms of the growth there. But the budget ask was still a little bit more than what we actually fulfilled. And so when you look at those numbers we think are trending the right way to look at our anticipated retirements, but also looking at the growth in the projects that are coming along with water. But also when you think about some of the conversions we had with temp employees, we reconciled some issues that we may have had with FLSA in a couple of groups, commercial, our customer care, and in some of our consultants. And so when you look at those numbers, they feel consistent, but there was a move to increase our staff levels. And this is where those kind of growth areas were. I hope the type is, it's little, so I'll kind of go through them. In 22, wastewater went up approximately 25 people. When you look at 23, wastewater went up another 55. That was a good section of that was conversions of consultants. When you look at the technology services, a good portion of that was a conversion of consultants. In HR, it was across the board in all of my groups. We went up by 1 or 2 for coverage, better coverages. And when you look at the budgeted for 24, we had 108 budgeted. We have not gone up nearly that number, but that was the budgeted ask. And when you look at 25, we're looking to increase 1.5%, but we've also pushed back. So there is you look at that red number of 12, those were things that we asked for that through this budgeting process, we've eliminated some of those. And it's pretty much across the board. Questions?
So how many temporary or contracted employees does JEA have right now?
160 some. 160 some.
Okay. Thanks.
It's down from about 240 over that time.
And what's driving the increase to the back office employees?
I think some of it is we were using temps and we were using them for a little bit longer than we were probably supposed to. And so we had conversions in certain groups. I would say when I look at commercial and I look at customer care, we still have a little bit more turnover than we would like. So we've had some advanced hiring there. When you look at supply chain and you look at procurement, we've grown. Part of that is the sophistication of what's been going on in supply chain and procurement. But also it was a response to just the complexity of what we saw in those areas. When you look at water, you've just got a growth in just the work. Electric is fairly flat. When I look at our 2 biggest groups though, we do have that impending retirement. Now, that's not the administration piece, but we've had a couple of additional apprenticeship classes that we've started. And so our numbers are trending up, but I would say they're trending up slower than we had anticipated. And I think that means we're controlling it pretty well.
I don't see how we can say we're controlling it very well. This is an explosion. Yeah, I mean, what is it? 10 or 15% more people? Flat revenues? You can't do that. I know that was a previous administration, but this administration needs to look at it.
Absolutely. I wanted to add to that, these numbers will probably move around and probably come down once we get the ITN consultant in here to do benchmarking, not only on the number of staff and in what areas they're in, but also salary levels. And so I anticipate when the board chooses that consultant, that some of this will change. We left it the way it is, and you mentioned back office staff, Ms. Humphrey. I think we're going to see a shift to go out into the field. We have a lot of water, wastewater work going on, some electric, and so we're going to be shifting people or lowering the head count. This would be worst case. The shifting will happen and the analysis will happen.
Can this happen for fiscal year 25? I mean, it's going to take time, right?
Mr. Stein, I can't answer that 100%. I would hope it could happen, but I can't say that for 100%.
Just, which isn't in these numbers, but we have a lot of people that can retire right now. How does that reflect your thinking in all this?
I am going to let David and Pat talk to that. They know the details of that for the number of retirees and where they are.
When we think about the apprenticeship programs, Mr. Stein, that is where we're trying to anticipate. We've got 2 classes that we would like to start, coming in the fall. We've got 3 classes that are underway in the last year. And so we're locked into certain ratios, but we feel good about what we're doing to plan for that.
So I agree with John. I mean, it's shocking to me, the increases, and I appreciate you, Vicki, focusing on this. The question I have is, David, do you think when we're looking for people, are we competitive?
Yes, I think we're competitive. Our turnover is not great. We do have people that will experiment and leave, but they often want to return. So I think we're competitive, but we don't lead the market, and so we've got to continue. I think we have a good benefit mix, as Pat mentioned. In spite of what you hear, our pension is still very strong. It's different, but it is still very strong. So I feel when we recruit people, we keep them here. We've got to continue to develop, but I think we're competitive.
To get back to John Baker's point, are we sort of in a conundrum though with, we have more customers increasing, yet the rates are flat as far as energy usage and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not so sure that doesn't necessarily imply that that we don't need more folks if we have more customers, right? So how do we balance that? Or is that the predicament we're in right now, sort of?
It's part of the conundrum that you describe is real. You've got, because we're a technical workforce, the learning curve is the longest that I've experienced in my career. You cannot have someone thrown out here on a Monday and by Friday they get it. It is very technical work. It takes time to train. Our training programs are demanding. They're probably the best in class. We do a good job, I believe, of positioning folk for success, but it does take time. And so to anticipate causes you to kind of sometimes overcorrect. And I think we're still trying to work to get that type of threshold of when you kind of start that stopwatch of increase.
I would just like to add what the previous speakers have said. So the projected revenue is flat on the electric side. The revenue is showing growing on the water side. And so the number of FTEs are not growing on the electric side. It's more on the water side. And our folks are really keeping an eye towards the future because the way the systems are growing is different. We're looking at the possibility of retiring units on the electric side. And so rather than bringing on FTEs to support that, it's more contract labor to do that. So we are being mindful of what's happening in the future. So you're seeing those FTEs on water to support the growth and to support the infrastructure, and then flat on electric.
Thank you, Rick.
We do have to pay contractors, though.
And is there a time limit of how long we keep contractors on the payroll?
When it's a company, actually, not really. When it's an individual, heck yeah. And we were a little bit loose with that a couple of years ago. We've gotten much better as a team around kind of tracking and, deploying.
Any other questions at all?
All right. Next, we have our electric system. For 25, we're assuming flat sales growth at 12,200,000 megawatt hour sales. We've assumed flat sales even though there's 2% growth, and that's primarily due to energy efficiencies and changes in behavior. From 24 to 25, you see an increase of 57 million in base revenue. That reflects a mid-year base rate increase. Then you see a decrease of 23 million in fuel revenue and a decrease of 17 million in other revenue. Here is the electric system operating budget. The slide breaks down the 1.347 billion budget into the operating components. The largest in 25 is our fuel and purchase power at 423 million. That's approximately 1/3 of our operating budget, a significant decrease compared to 22 and 23. And remember, this expense is passed directly to our customers through the fuel charge each month, meaning we only collect what it costs. The non-fuel purchase power is 245 million. This includes a withdrawal of 45 million from the stabilization fund to slightly offset Vogtle expenses and help alleviate rate pressure. For the non-fuel purchase power in 22 and 23, we contributed to the stabilization fund to help offset that future Vogtle expense. We have set aside 246 million to help fund future plant Vogtle costs. And we have strategic plans for the withdrawals, and we have a future slide on this topic. The O&M budget is 315 million. It's flat from 23. We'll be reviewing this closer as well in another slide. For 25 debt service, it's projected to be 15 million higher than 24, and new money debt issuance of 147 million. Here's an illustration that breaks down the electric operating budget into its components into the dollar. So for every dollar a customer pays for electric service, this is where the money is going. Fuel and purchase power is the largest expense. Here we have our fuel. You see the historical budget versus actuals 21 through 23. higher fuel expense in 22 and 23 due to the global fuel market's reaction to the war in Ukraine. Expenses for 24 currently expected to be 176 million less than 23 and 16 million less than budget. This reduction in fuel is passed on to our customers. For the remaining months of 24, JEA has 66% of expected fuel expenses hedged at a fixed price. The budgeted fuel and purchase power expense for 25 are 23 million lower than 24. The two main drivers for the decrease is first, the inclusion of the Vogtle production tax credit in the forecast, and two is lower projected purchase power prices. To help mitigate the future fuel price risk in 25, we have that hedged at 52%. This is the hedge forecast as of last month, and we do expect that to approach 60% by year end. Here is the non-fuel purchase power rate stabilization fund activity. At the top in the green line graph is the non-fuel projected Vogtle expenses from 24 to 29. Starting in 25, we plan to withdraw 45 million from the fund, which results in a reduction of the 25 budget, and planning to withdraw down to zero by 29. So we'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
My question is, we're factoring in nat gas prices staying low. I have a concern about, I think they're at the lowest level. We've had 2 warm winters. I would want to know where your thought process is in that.
It's a great question. I mean, we do have the forward curve in this forecast, our long-range forecast. And there is, for the first time in several years, what's referred to as contango, or a positive sloping price curve. We're going to continue to hedge. We did 34 million of hedging last week to fill in, to bring our minimum levels up a little bit. But we're not in a good place, I'd say, in the end of 26, 27. We need to start hedging, but the forward curve is already reflecting significant increases in pricing, driven largely by LNG.
Well, a lot of these LNG plants are coming online. It might be worth telling everybody what contango is so they can fully understand.
It's an upward sloping price curve. In the past, when gas prices were very low, the market was called backwardation, which is a negative, a dropping price curve the longer you go out. There's higher prices that are north of $4 the longer you go out.
I've spent a lot of time on this, and I think, natural gas, you've got a lot of LNG plants come on. You've got some large nat gas fields that are starting to close in. I think if we have any type of weather conditions, could change these numbers significantly.
And hopefully an easing of drilling restrictions. I watch it very closely too. A good friend of mine is with a major oil producer. We talk all the time. They're continuing to drill. So
I appreciate what y'all done on the hedging front. It's just a risk that could get away from you.
We're also continuing to enter into gas prepays. We're about to execute one for 55 cents for the next 30 years. Nancy Reinker and her group in fuels have been managing this great. We're now at cumulative gas prepay savings of 11 million per year. So, and that's going to continue to grow.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just would make the comment. First of all, you guys have been amazing on the hedging. It's been a wonderful success, and something you should be proud of. If I were in your shoes, I've loved the success that I've had, but the last thing I want to see is us hedging and paying more for fuel because of the hedge than we could buy it in the open market. And I would just tell you, we understand that that's a risk. And I would not have a bias to be conservative. I'd have a bias to do exactly what you think and push it out, because I mean, you heard Bobby's comments. We're not going to be jumping on you if you miss it after you batted 1,000 for 5 years and you bat 400. We still love you.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Baker. We continue to watch this, and theoretically, you should be agnostic to the market if you're hedged 50%. So the prior management wanted us to go higher, and the board, we were as high as 80%, and that turned out splendidly. I don't think we could have done a better job than that. And we benefited from low gas prices for the unhedged portion. To Bobby's point, the market's changing, and it's changing pretty quickly. So I agree, there's a balance between hedging and not hedging. And I would add that the Florida investor-owned utilities did not distinguish themselves in hedging, and the Public Service Commission prohibited them from doing any additional hedging. Now, they're paying for that now because they would have been hedging when we were, but they're not allowed to. So it's a great point, and we continue to monitor.
All right. Next, we have our electric system financial metrics. What is shown for each metric is our 21 through 23 actuals, projections based on 24 forecast, 25 budget, and 26 and 27 forecast. All are within our policy targets. We have a strong debt service coverage for 25 at 4.1 and remaining well above the pricing policy target of 2.2. 25 fixed charge coverage is at 1.6, impacted mainly by the Vogel coming online. Days of liquidity for 25 is at 224 days. This is impacted by the revolver available balance and remaining above the pricing policy target at 150 days. Debt to assets for 25 is 44.9% and remains under our target of 50% or less, but is increasing due to higher capital investment. Next, we have our treasurer, Randall Barnes, to cover debt.
Thanks, Lori. We're going to need to borrow about $147 million to fund the capital program. That's almost half of the capital program that we're planning for fiscal year 25. This will be the first new money electric system debt in well over a decade. So as you know, many of you know who have been around long enough, we've been on a persistent march over the last several years to pay down debt. We reached the electric system peak in debt outstanding at $4.3 billion back in fiscal year 09. And that was, at that point, JEA, the electric system was over 90% leveraged. We've made a lot of progress since then. And currently, I think in the previous slide you saw, we're sitting right around 43% leverage. That's great and in line with industry standards, and gives us the ability to do what we need to do from a capital standpoint. My friend Pedro here will provide more detail on the capital plan for fiscal year 25. It's going to be focused on growth and replacement in fiscal year 25. The $147 million that we need will add about $3.6 million in fiscal year 25. That's because we did a fine tune on when we would actually need the money. As we go into fiscal year 26, it'd be about $7 million each year in debt service added, but just in fiscal year 25, only about 3.6. If you look at the slide on the upper right-hand side, We're doing what we would call backloading the debt service. You see a huge decline in our debt service profile, starting around 2040. That's because we haven't issued debt in a long time. So the new money debt just now coming online, we'll start loading it on the back. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to make sure that we're promoting what's called generational equity. We want to make sure that our customers today aren't footing the full bill for the costs that we're incurring today. We'll spread those costs out over the next 30 years. That's in line with the assets that we're investing in and constructing. So over the course of fiscal year 25, debt will be going up by about $98 million to $1.505 billion at the end of the fiscal year. That's well below our debt ceiling that we put in place last year. You may recall we set up a debt ceiling approach with the city council to help make sure that we're staying within our means, managing our debt correctly. And so I'll talk more about that in a second. But if you go into the next slide, we'll talk about layering on the fiscal year 26 and 27 projected new debt needs. So in 26, we expect to need about $180 million in new borrowing, and in 27, about $307 million. And as you can see, it's a better illustration of the generational equity structuring that we're going to do. You'll see us getting more close to levelized debt service over time. And once we get to level debt service, then we won't do that backloading anymore. But that'll take some time as we add new debt. And so on the bottom of the chart, you see where we expect debt to be at the end of fiscal year 26 and 27. Still below our debt ceiling in fiscal year 27, but not a lot of room. That's something we'll probably need to address in the next year or two as we invest invest capital into our assets. We're going to need to make sure that we have the capacity to fund those assets, and in reality, as we add assets, the debt to asset ratio will govern how much we can add. So we'll be able to adjust that debt ceiling upwards if we need to over time. And I think I'll turn it back over to Lori.
Okay, for the debt ceiling, though, just so I understand, that's established by the city, right?
Yes, sir. So we recommended it. We approved it. The board approved it, and then it was approved at the city. And the rationale for setting the debt ceiling was the debt to asset ratio. So that governs how much we want to stay within our pricing policy of 50% debt to asset ratio, or in line with that. So we'll continue to look at that as we add assets. That's going to change the ratio to some degree. So we can increase the debt ceiling thoughtfully and still stay within that 50% leverage ratio.
But the next 3 years, we're going to be increasing debt by $600 million, which doesn't include some of these PPAs we're doing with Vogel, these solar deals.
That's correct.
That's correct,
I
sir.
just, from my simple mind, how much, so I understand the 600 million. What I don't understand are the PPAs that we have. I know,
It's a great
Vogel, the solar deals, how does that calculate into the thought process?
On the solar, there's no capacity payment. It's energy only. So we're not factoring in any cost other than energy into that fixed charge coverage. Vogel, on the other hand, for the next 10 years, since Unit 4 came online, the debt service is approximately $175 million a year. We determined that we weren't going to set rates based on a AA threshold for that ratio, which is 2 times. We couldn't justify raising customer rates for this fixed charge. The 1.6 in the pricing policy is very close to the minimum of 1.5 for a single A rated. But we believe that we still view the electric system as a AA credit, even though that fixed charge coverage number is a little bit low, because we have other characteristics that offset the fixed charge coverage ratio. Again, we just could not justify raising customer rates to bring that fixed charge coverage number up to 2 times.
Okay.
But it's 175 million in debt service. It's significant.
I'm assuming that the debt in here includes building the combined cycle plant. Is it 2028?
There's a lot of construction that happens in 2027, so the fiscal year 25 is not impacted that much by it, and Pedro will get more into detail on that. But yes, the 26 and 27 debt borrowings that we'll need to do are influenced by that construction. So that's potentially, depending on how we move forward on that, will influence those debt numbers.
And the Biden administration has put in some new regulations that make that more expensive. Has that been plugged into the numbers?
I'll defer to Pedro.
I'll answer the question. So the regulation on greenhouse gases is what you were making reference to. For those that didn't know, it was enacted in April. We are actually doing a production modeling to readjust our plans to ensure we understand and ensure we can justify what our next steps are going to be. We're providing an update in our capital committee meeting in August to provide you more details associated with how that impact and how that is going to fit into the equation. At this moment, it's so recent. We are working through that process. We'll have more information in our August meeting.
That's fair. But your seat of the pants, is it a big number?
I'll say with due respect, it's a good question. I think let me describe a little bit of it, if I may. 3 potential outcomes, right? We understand that carbon capture and sequestration is a requirement. Also capacity limitations, and how much you can utilize a unit. Those are 2 main drivers. Based on that, you either may need more resources or different resources from a technology, and that will translate into cost. Also, when you're talking about carbon capture and sequestration for Florida, we don't have the geology. So how do we handle that to ensure who carries the cost, how that it's done? There are some technology that has to be evaluated, also transporting out of the state, how that infrastructure will play out. There's a lot of unknown on that aspect, but we believe that we are going to have enough information in the next meeting in August to provide a little bit more order of magnitude and understanding some of the next steps. It's going to be a continuous discussion, a continuous fine tuning in the process. I understand your question. For now, we are budgeting $825 million, and I'll talk about that a little bit, for putting a unit in service by 2030. I'll touch on that during my update, but that's what we're budgeting for, as was identified during the last IRP. Is that good? Thank you.
All right. Next, we have our capital budget for electric. For 25, it is $307 million. That's a $36 million increase from 24 budget. The bulk of the plan is transmission and distribution projects in 25. It's funded with the new debt of $147 million for 25. And we'll have Pedro go next with a deeper dive into those projects.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. During the recent board capital committee meeting, we presented the capital project delivery process of identification, funding, execution, and integration. Today, we'll be discussing funding of these projects. I'll describe a little bit of the capital improvement plan. These are some projects, but the capital improvement plan includes projects related to new expansion and infrastructure, real estate transactions, replacement of end of life, new tools, equipment, fleet, facilities to support technology and security measures to serve our customers. The 3 main areas that we discussed the last time and we're talking about today is growth or capacity, environmental regulations, which is a main driver of a lot of our capital, and renewable and replacement of our facilities. Let's go over some of the electric projects. In general, we have 402 active projects and programs. 95 of these are under construction. The first one on the screen today is related to the solar projects we recently signed off. We have about $40 million on overall project budget. That's what OPB stands for. Of these, we're expecting to spend some about $1 million, almost $2 million next year, moving into 2026 when the 3 sites will come online. GC to Mayo 230 kV circuit. Recently, we put in service the substation that is serving that area as part of the growth that is happening in the Mayo footprint. We are bringing also underground systems and also having a transmission corridor. Total cost on that area is $66 million. We are doing some transactions, and that's what we're highlighting on this particular project for the transmission line, which is being discussed with the board. That is going to follow on with transmission being built between these 2 ends to provide additional backup and support and reliability for that project. The North Jacksonville area has a 138 kV transmission line for which we're having a real estate transaction that we have to acquire through the process. It's a main driver. The overall project is going to be about $70 million. It is beyond 2027. Transmission takes some time. We are seeing a growth on that particular area, and we need to back up that load that is being added to our system. That's the main driver of that particular project. From a long-term perspective, we're building a substation. It's going to be interconnected. In the loop, we'll see that at the back end as we continue doing long-term forecasting. The development-driven projects continue being a good story. We're seeing a lot of growth. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of increased cost. I'd like to share a few statistics so we can share why we're seeing a significant amount of dollars. Using 2020 average, 2020, 2021, 2022, we're paying 91% higher cost on our residential cost installations. In the apartment buildings, we're seeing a trend that we're seeing more apartment buildings coming through. We're paying 78% more than what we were paying back in 2020 currently. When we're discussing some of the cables that we're acquiring, the cost of copper as multiple weeks in a row is breaking records on how expensive it is, unfortunately. The cost is 340% for most of the cabling that we are acquiring to be able to execute these capital projects. This is a total cost normalized on the units that we're building. We'll continue looking forward to supporting the development community, adding all these new customers. The cost of the material, the cost of project execution is increasing. And so the reason we'll continue having these high numbers right now from an execution of electric projects development. Next, we already touched a little bit on the combined cycle. The overall project budget is right now set for a 2030 commercial operation date. $825 million is what we're projecting. The cost, this is going to be verified. This is going to be discussed. We're providing you an update on progress on this and also the risk associated with the project and next step. Our fleet continue being expanded. We have an aging set of vehicles and equipment that needs to be replaced to be able to serve our customers when they're called upon. We are actually expecting the replacement of vehicles to contribute around $10 million to $50 million, give it or take next year. And it's an area that we are seeing also a need for our vehicles and equipment.
So on the solar projects, the land that we had, how do we contribute that to lower costs, or how is that factored into the PPA?
So it's a very good question. I'll describe a few elements of the transaction that might help answer that question. So we understand that the value of the land contribution into the project. So as we brought that in, we're looking at what it will be developing the project and the cost that we'll pay for $1 per megawatt hour for the entire 35 years in a favorable way. If JEA ultimately comes out of the contract, we'll have a transaction on renting the land, which JEA will receive a rent. If we were not the ultimate recipients of this for any period of time on the 35 years, And then we will have a way to negotiate that specific price if the land was to be leased because the project is not benefiting our customers. That is not the plan. The plan is to use it for the entire 35 years. So we did an assessment outside of market and inside of market to then determine what the value contribution to our customers to use our land.
But didn't we just negotiate that deal?
Yes, we just did.
Yeah.
It just got signed May 8th. And recently the lease got signed on June 12th.
But how did you factor it? If you did a deal, how did you factor the property in?
So when we did the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, there was an analysis done on inside of our footprint in our own land, determining the value of that, and also getting it from outside. So that basically how we'll set the basis on how we value the land and how that contributes into the process based on all the projects that the group that supported us through the process have seen in the market. And we use that as our, I'll use the word ceiling, and then we negotiate it down from that number.
Thank you, Pedro.
Does that help?
Yeah, it was very helpful.
All right, next we have our electric system operating and maintenance budget. It is $315 million for 25, and we were able to keep that flat in comparison to 24. On the right, you see the changes by categories. We have an increase of $20.1 million in salaries, overtime, and benefits, and that was offset by the decreases, services and charges of 8.9, 2.4 million in other, and 1.4 million in supplies, materials, and an increase of the credits. On the left, we have a breakdown by expense types within these categories. So the first one is our entire salaries budget of 220, and it's broken down between salaries, benefits, overtime, and capital administrative overhead. Then we have our services and charges, and we have our top 4 expenses there: industrial services, professional maintenance agreements, and environmental services. And then lastly, supplies and materials, and those are our top 2 expenses there: non-generation fuels and inventory issued. So next we have Pedro.
I think this is a simple illustration. We don't have a lot of details other than to share that in FY24 and 25, we had this large project happening in Kennedy to comply with environmental. We wanted just to make sure this is in front of the team as to why there was a need for additional dollars in this area. If there's any technical questions, we have SMEs in the room, subject matter experts that can help.
Pedro, so getting back to the carbon sequestration thing.
Yes, sir.
So, and maybe you know the answer, who currently right now is at the federal level, state level, who's working at how the heck is sequestration going to be, some feasible options for here in Jacksonville?
So all the above, I'll say, are actively involved, whether it's DOE, other national labs, and there are some projects in the country that are happening in the US. I'd like to provide you more updates in the meeting in our August update, so I can be more specific. I'll ask also Kevin, who has been helping us with this, to kind of fill some of these specific of what is happening from a regulatory side as well.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Kevin Holbrook. I'm Director of Environmental Operations and sort of the lead on the greenhouse gas rulemaking and following the rules, environmental rules and regulations. We currently, obviously, there's a lot of questions about the rule itself. There's a lot of litigation going on, but as far as the carbon sequestration, the technology is there to capture the carbon. We know that that's a viable part of it. Carbon sequestration, the sequestration part about actually doing deep well injections in Florida, we don't know if that's viable or not. So as the rule moves forward, and as we look into our future generation and what our capacities are going to be needing, and if we're going to have to pursue this, we'll have to do the studies to see if it's viable and that we could actually store it in our own geological area, or we're going to have to look into piping it somewhere. Once again, it's all a cost factor. is this going to be technology that's going to be able to be done by that 2030 deadline? I can't answer that right now. If we can't do it in our own territory, there's no existing pipelines. So I don't see that infrastructure being built just because of the permitting processes that you have to go through, especially if we're looking to having to go into South Georgia or other areas of the country.
Thanks.
So next we have Brad Kroll.
Hi, good morning, Chair DeSalvo and members of the board. Before you see the increases in maintenance agreements for technology services accounting for about $10 million from FY21 to FY27. The majority of those costs are associated with enterprise contract increases. We have large contracts with corporations like Microsoft and Oracle. Typically, we see anywhere between 6 and 10% increases on these contracts. We try to negotiate these numbers lower and have been successful in some of those negotiations. Additionally, we have additional investments in cybersecurity. We continue to invest in cybersecurity. It's critical to our posture, and investing in new technology such as cloud services, which is driving the increase in cost.
Any questions?
Thanks, Brad.
Just listening to the carbon sequestration comment, it's very scary. And I think a lot of us are hoping that it won't get through, but we sure need a plan B if it does, because it looks like it could really be devastating.
But I mean, if you take that plus Senate Bill 64, I mean, there are a lot of costs that have never been tried before. I mean, we're in no man's land, and I don't think people thought through that. I just, the amount of costs that we're looking at in untried technology is crazy.
How is FP&L and Progress Energy or Duke dealing with these same issues? We know.
The little reading I've done on it, everybody's in the same boat right now, trying, and I think, well, it's like you said, John, there's a lot of risk here. I'm not so sure how much options are going to come at the federal level, because right now there's nothing, and talking to one person who works at Idaho National Lab, I asked them, and they're working right now on it, but they're sort of flying in the dark too, as well as the other 18 other national labs on this. So I'm no expert on it, but I don't think anybody knows what the way ahead is on this, and who really is driving the technological answers for this. It's like they put a mark on the wall out there, and then, okay, they'll figure it out later, hopefully, and hope's not a method, but right now, from what I'm reading and understanding, yeah, this is a huge challenge.
But the biggest, I mean, we look at Plan B, but Plan A is to step up our lobbying effort to making sure we have the right people and make sure we're working together with other utilities to make sure we're thoughtful in this process.
So on that great note.
Well, I would like to add just that our trade organizations, LPPC, APPA, are pushing back with legal challenges, as well as the private utilities, and to remind everyone that nothing has been ever approved and put into place as it was first introduced. And the words scary are appropriate, expensive are appropriate. The good news is we're not in this alone. And I know Kevin has been working very hard on the lobbying efforts. And he has a lot of experience and very well respected. And we are working in tandem with our trade organizations that we're members of, and they are extremely active in that lobbying.
Thank you, Vicki.
All right, that concludes our electric portion. So now we'll talk about our water system. All right, for 25, we projected an increase of sales of 1,055 million gallons. Looking 24 to 25, we see an increase of 10 million to water revenue, an increase of 14 million to wastewater revenue, an increase of 4 million to reclaim revenue. This revenue increase reflects a mid-year rate increase. We see a decrease in capacity of 16 million and an increase of 9 million in other. The slide here breaks down the operating budget into its different components. The 25 budget is 634 million. This is an increase of 21 million compared to 24. For 25, we have new money debt issuance forecasted at 462 million. The O&M budget of 263 million, which is an increase of 27 over 24, and we'll be reviewing that closer in future slides. Here's an illustration that breaks down the water operating budget components into the dollar. So for every dollar of water services on a customer's bill, this is where the money is going. The largest expense being our O&M. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll go on to the next. Here we have our water systems financial metrics. We have the 21 through 23 actuals, then we have the 24 forecast, 25 budget, and 26 and 27 forecast. All metrics are within our policy targets. We have a strong debt service coverage for 25 at 2.7 and remaining well within the policy target of 2. Days of liquidity for 25 is 151 days. This is impacted by our revolver available balance and remains above our policy target of 100. Debt to assets for 25 is 43.9%, and it remains under our target of 50% or less, but is increasing due to higher capital investments. And next, we'll have Randall cover our debt.
Okay, thanks again. So in fiscal year 25, we're going to need to borrow 462 million of new money debt. That's about 70% of the total water and sewer capital program. So significant wide-ranging capital program that my friend Pedro again will address in a few minutes. Just as a reference point, the debt peak for the water and sewer system was 2.1 billion back in fiscal year 11. So similar to the electric system, there's been a consistent march towards lower leverage. Back in fiscal year 11, and we were about 70% leveraged, and today, as just mentioned, we're in the 40% area. This new borrowing will put us to about 44%, but still below our 50% debt to asset ratio metric that we have in the pricing policy. So the 462 million will add about 17.2 million of debt service in fiscal year 25, and in years forward, about $23 million a year. Again, we did a fine tune on when we would need the money, and so we were very cautious about how much we would actually have in debt service increase in fiscal year 25. And again, you can see on the chart on the upper right-hand side, we will continue to backload the debt until we get to levelized debt service. If you look at the chart, the blue area, you can see the bond issue that we did earlier this year. We did the same thing, and you can see that we have debt service out past 2042 that was levelized out there. This one, fiscal year 25, will be layered on top of that. And then when we get to the next slide, you'll see a continual layer until we get to levelized debt service. On the little table at the bottom right-hand side, the debt, water and sewer system debt will go up by about 307 million net, still well below the $2.5 billion debt ceiling. that we set last year. So, we can go ahead and go to on the next slide. You can see we are adding fiscal year 26 and 27, continuing to backload debt service, and we pretty much achieved by the time we get to 27 almost levelized debt service. As you can see, we have significant needs in 26 and 27 as well. So we're projecting $361 million of additional borrowing in 26 and $306 million in 27. Even with all that, we're still below our current debt ceiling. But again, as I mentioned, the same thing with the electric system. We'll continue to monitor what we need that debt ceiling to be and make sure that it stays within our pricing policy. That's the important thing to consider, that this entire plan, the financial model that Julie talked about earlier, is within the context of staying within our pricing policy and keeping our metrics at levels that will keep our ratings in line with where they are today.
But you're going to be spending $1.3 billion. Are these projects in process, or are they planned? What percentage are in process right now, that $1.3 billion?
Over the course of the 3-year time horizon we're talking about today, I'll leave that to Pedro, but it's a lot of different projects. So many of them are already underway. We've already borrowed for some of them. Most of it doesn't have to do with the Senate Bill 64. That's further out. There's a little bit of capital for that towards the end of the 3-year business plan. So we have a lot of needs on the water system side.
Yeah, I mean, the 5 projects we looked at last couple, it looks like a lot of this stuff is in process.
That's correct.
Is that correct, Pedro?
Yes, and we have a list of a few others we want to discuss today, and also plan to give you an update in the next capital meeting to start sharing some of those large projects with more details on it. Several of these are plant related. We're building some plans, and that requires extensive capital. We haven't done many plans in many, many years. We've seen a great growth in this area. Reclaim continue being the right thing to do for this region, and those are the main drivers. We also have on-end capital, so we reinvest on the system. The system did not get enough investments prior in several years. So we're catching up on galvanized pipes that need to be replaced, that are affecting customers that are getting low pressure. And some of those large projects are also part of the long-term plan. I'll touch on that on my time, but I wanted to directly answer your question on some of the drivers.
If we went to the market today with this debt, what will we be paying in interest? 3?
In terms of the rate, it would be in the around 4% all in, because we would issue 30-year bonds that would be, there would be across the curve, there would be different rates, but all in about 4, around 4.25. Yeah.
And if the short-term rates come down because the Fed does what we hope they're going to do, will that affect our rates?
Certainly, it would affect to some degree. Obviously, it depends on what happens all the way across the curve, but we amortize over the full 30-year time frame, and certainly it would lower our cost of our revolver once we use as a bridge to fund our capital until we do fix out of a long-term deal. So I think currently we're paying in the 5.25% to 5.5% range for the revolver. So yeah, it's expensive.
Big difference.
It'd be nice to get lower rates on the front end.
Any other questions? If it's okay with folks, I propose we take a 10-minute break, and we'll kick up again at 20 of. You ready, Ms. Vicky? Okay, if everybody could take their seats, we'll go and get started again. Thanks.
All right. I'll get us started. So we left off with our water capital budget for 25 that is set at 567 million. That's a 53 million increase from 24 budget. The bulk of the plan are our wastewater projects. The projects will require borrowing of 462 million for 25. Next, we'll have Pedro with a deeper dive into the capital projects.
We continue with a similar discussion. Water has 457 active projects and programs, of which 196 of these are under construction. We will go into more details during the August meeting on regards to projects, but for these projects that we'll go through in growth, environmental, and renewable and replacement, the first one we have on the screen is the water purification demonstration facility. What we'd like to share is we have about $91 million in a combination of the pipes to connect this facility to Arlington. We have an aquifer recharge well that we are beginning exploration and executing through ensuring it gets commissioned. We're seeing this project coming into service next year, and we will be providing you details in our August meeting on this particular project. It's tied to the Senate Bill 64. Surface water discharge is going to set the foundation. A few highlights on this project is going to provide the opportunity to test different technologies, different processes to ensure purification is achieved, and also allow for any other things that need to be removed from wastewaters to make this water accessible. So more details during the next meeting, but this is an environmental related project. While there's a lot of projects listed here, they are all classified surface water discharge. We want to highlight there's going to be a lot of deep injections disposal wells that we will need to execute in future years. We're illustrating here that in the next 3 years, we do not have a significant expense related to this project, but beyond 2027 to achieve compliance by 2032, the total overall project budget is about $1.8 billion. More to come as we continue learning more. We're going to have Kevin a little bit discussing on the regulatory side where we at with this type of projects. Buckman is not new to anyone. It's a renewable replacement. We know we have to make an investment on these facilities. We have known for a while. We currently have several projects as listed here. You all remember the biosolid process facility was one of the projects the Capital Project Committee was able to review. All these projects combined is $418 million, and $86 million are expected for next year as part of our capital program. Sir Stein had a question about specific projects that are going on. One of these is Arlington East has some specific work as well that needs to prepare for. We're having an overall project budget of $215 million with $41 million in 2025. This is one of the projects that we will be providing an update as well. We'll share as we're going through the execution projects process. From a renewable and replacement as well, small diameter pipe, I touched on this, the galvanized program. There's a lot of it across service areas that are old areas, I'll call it. They've been existing here in Jacksonville. They have pipes that are 40, 50, 60 years old and we have that responsibility to serve our customers. We have a specific programs that get executed, some projects. We wanted to share that we spent about $14 million this year, 17, and we're increasing that overall program as we continue as a multi-year plan. South Side Integrated Piping System is a project called SIPS. We have a Deerwood Southwest and all the way to Greenland. The overall project budget was $102 million. In 2025, we're expecting to spend $25 million in this project, which is something that the board will be receiving additional updates and discussions in regards to easements to support this project. Northwest, growth continue being an important element in our region for water. We have a new water reclamation facility. We're budgeting $120 million. We're starting the process in FY25. We're highlighting this project as this is one that we also plan to bring to the Capital Committee to ensure we are proactively following the process, informing what the expending is going to look like, ensuring we're within the limits as we continue growing. Blackford is an existing facility that has been expanded, all as a result of growth and demand. We have a $210 million overall project budget. We're starting a lot of work in 2025. And I'll say it again, this is another project that we're starting to work through, has already been planned, has a justification. We will update the Capital Committee to ensure we can execute it in future years. Overall project budget.
Some of these was less than the sum of the.
That is correct, because it passes beyond 27, either passes beyond 27 or the project has spent year to date a specific amount.
So, but if
Yes.
you go back to some of them, it's way more than the OPB.
The cash, yeah, it could be.
Go back a couple of slides.
So all of them are showing you only 3 years, and we are actually having the overall project budget that has been in the system. We're only showing parts of it.
While we're at the water purification, if it wasn't for Senate Bill 6, would we be doing that?
That's a great question. Just like electric, water did an integrated resource plan and identified in that integrated resource plan before Senate Bill 64 was water purification. Yes, sir. So this is water purification isn't a reaction to Senate Bill 64. It's more related to well field sustainability.
Thank you, Ray.
Pedro, once we have Buckman sludge finished, how much will that save in operating expenses?
Mr. Haibu, would you please come and help me answer this question, because I think it's more on the operating side.
Yeah.
So let's, Mr. Haibu, if you don't mind, please. Can you re-ask the question, Bobby, if you don't mind?
So once Buckman sludge is redone, what are we going to save in operating expenses by having our own facility?
So currently, with the dryers having issues, we're having to haul in biosolids for land application and land filling. And it can go up to $7 million a year currently, and much higher in the future. The reason that is because of restrictions on both land filling and land application. So when we have the biosolids completed, we will have make a product that can be processed and sold as a fertilizer and actually produce revenues. So to try to answer your question, Bobby, you're talking about $7 to $20 million of operating expenses that we can save per year.
So you're saying we're spending $400 million to save $20 million a year, somewhere between $7 and $20 million a year.
Yes, sir. And that is assuming that we do have locations to take the biosolids to in the future. And that is a huge thing for us because of future regulations. We may not be able to identify locations that we can haul these biosolids to. We may have to take them out of state, and then the cost will be increasing much more than that.
So we did and we can provide the information again, we did a project payback on the dryers versus disposal. So the numbers that Hy was just talking about was with the current dryers, the one dryer functioning and the hauling costs. If you don't have a dryer, you're just doing hauling, that cost goes up. But we did an overall, when the engineer came in and looked at different options for processing biosolids, this was the one that was the most economical. And Hy, forgive me, I don't remember what the payback, but I think the payback was somewhere around 10 to 12 years.
That's correct. I think around 12.7 was our analysis.
Okay, thank you.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think one more slide, please. Go back one, please. These are the ones that we cover. With that, I will turn it over to Kevin Holbrook, who's going to be he's our Director of Environmental Operations. He's going to cover the regulations like he's doing on the electric side. He's our lead on the other side. So thank you, sir.
All environmental, it's all good news, right? I'm going to flip-flop these since everyone's, I think, very familiar with Senate Bill 64 and the potential costs. Once again, this is the bill that was passed to eliminate non-beneficial surface water discharges from our wastewater facilities. We were required to submit a plan by November of 2021. We submitted our plan in October of 2021, and it was approved by DEP in summer of 2022. It was actually done on each individual plant was approved. So it took a couple of months to get approved, but the plan was officially approved in 2022. We've been moving forward on it. Just want to remind, and Pedro touched on this, it consists of deep water and reuse, recharge wells, water purification, and increased reclaim water. So numerous steps involved and lots of projects moving forward. The other big caveat is most of these funds are post 2027. The expenditures are all going to be between 27 and 32. So moving on, I did want to talk about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, otherwise known as PFAS. These substances have been around since the 40s. Think Teflon, waterproofing, those type of substances. Basically, there's thousands of them. They're large polymers. They were very effective. So EPA's become very aggressive on regulating. They're considered forever chemicals because they're large chemicals. They don't break down in the environment, so they stick around forever. So this EPA administration has been very aggressive about setting rules and eliminating sources, as well as setting drinking water and other standards. Recently, they've just set the drinking water standards. We're very fortunate here in Jacksonville because of the drinking water sources of the Florida aquifer. We're not going to have minimal impacts from that drinking water rule. Besides additional sampling and testing, we don't foresee any reason to do any additional treatment. So the water purification, obviously the treatment processes involved with the water purification process will eliminate any potential issues with the PFAS chemicals in the wastewater streams. The other part of this is EPA is now moving forward with addressing wastewater water quality standards. Buckman, being one of the top 400 largest wastewater facilities in the country, has been chosen or picked to participate in what's called an information collection request, basically to provide information to EPA on the concentration of PFAS in our wastewater influent, effluent, and from our industrial users that are tied into the system. We're expecting to get that request sometime this summer, like, late summer, early fall. It's probably going to give us a timeline of between 6 to 12 months to complete it. Once EPA gets this information from the other facilities as well as ours, they'll move forward with setting water quality standards. And depending on what those water quality standards are, we could have substantial impacts to our wastewater treatment system involving a lot of more additional treatment, being granulated, activated, carbon, or ion exchange, so it could greatly increase the treatment costs of our wastewater effluent. Any questions?
So does that mean that all we're doing at Buckman might get thrown out the window?
No, sir. No, sir. It's like everything we're doing at Buckman is a good thing. And as Hy mentioned, the biosolids are going to be part of this. And one of the things is with the PFAS and the concentration levels, we may have to remove the PFAS before they are allowed to be landfilled or disposed of. And it's a concern, and it's a concern not only for us, obviously, but for every wastewater system.
Can we use it for fertilizer?
And that all depend on the concentration levels that they set.
So, Pedro, where is the CAIC factored into these assets?
The
Contribution
aided for those that, the
Yeah.
contribution aided construction. That policy is primarily in, and I'll speak on the electric first, and then we'll cover in regards to the water in a second. From an electric, any project that has to electric and a new development, it is calculated at the beginning of the process to understand our payback. The policy sets some time specific on our revenue covering requirements within a specific window, the type, depending on the type of customer. So that is at the front end, and that is calculated, determined, working with the project accounting team when it does apply. In the water side of the business, we have cost participation policies that JEA contributes to, but the majority of the project development, the actual developer covers the actual infrastructure on its entirety.
And I'll let finance, but we have the infrastructure is contributed, but we also have capacity fees on the water side, and we do not have that on the electric side. But I'm swimming out of my lane, Joe.
I think that's correct, Ray. It's far more prevalent on the water side. I believe the total kayak last year was in the neighborhood of $80 million. So it's significant. Electric was far less than that.
We recently conducted a review as we're seeing cost increases, and we're not seeing any significant change. What I shared with you all, and we'll continue looking at the policy and how that applies as we go forward to cover projects.
Thank you, guys.
All right, next we have our 25 O&M budget. For water, it's $263 million. That's an increase of $27 million compared to 24 budget. This is primarily driven by labor costs, an increase of $6 million in shared services. Also important to note as a driver is we have 2 plants coming online in 25, the H2O Purification Center and Greenland Water Reclamation Facility. On the right, you see the categories: salaries, overtime, and benefits going up 17.5, shared services 6, services and charges 2.4, 0.1 for supplies and material, and 1.3 million for other. On the left, we provide the expenses within those categories. You see salaries, benefits, overtime broken down, and then we have shared services with the intercompany charges, services and charges. We have our top 2 expenses, utilities and industrial services. Then supplies and materials, we have chemicals and gases, and direct purchases are our largest 2 expenses. Next, we have Russell Caffey. He's going to do a deeper dive into our shared services.
Thank you, Lori. Here at JEA, some costs benefit both water and electric. We have 257 cost centers here, and 122 of those cost centers benefit both systems. As you look at this slide, the costs originate on the outside in the dark blue circles and ultimately end up in the 2 green circles in the center. The dark blue represents cost centers with mixed water and electric expenses. As you move closer to the center, the light blue circles are the allocation bases for corresponding expenses. This is our rationale for dividing up the costs and distributing them into the 2 systems in the center. And you'll notice some of the allocations are used for multiple cost centers. Since we have 122 cost centers, and there's about 20 allocation bases. This chart depicts the changes in shared services over the past 3 years and then 2 forward-looking years. The salaries and benefits are the light blue on the bottom, and the dark blue on the top is other shared services and charges. From 2021 to 2023, other shared service or other services and charges increased 12 million. The key drivers were a $4 million increase in rent, 2 million in professional services, and 1.6 in IT agreements.
Can you go back to the previous slide? Tell me again what kind of services this is for. Does this have to do with capital?
No, so basically what we do is, actually go back to the slide before that. Might
Is
be a
this
little easier.
SG&A or capital, or where does this fit?
I didn't hear what he said.
Is it SG&A or capital? Where does it fit was his question.
Yeah,
This is all O&M.
O&M, okay.
So if you look, so basically like finance is on the bottom in the middle. And finance, what we do is we service both systems. And we have an allocation base that we decide on finance is perceived on how much we spend on each system. And we use that as our ratio. As you go around the circle, other things like field services, they just take the number of meter connects for each one. And it's very cut and dry. Some of these, we have to, we survey it out, and we're actually we went out for bid to bring in a service to actually look at this and make sure that what we're doing is best practices. But we look at it every year, and E&Y looks at it during our audit and make sure that everything's reasonable. But we basically just take charges that go to both of them and that we can't say is specifically electric or specifically water, and we have to come up with a way of allocating it. And for a lot of them, it's just the number of accounts. For HR, it's the number of people allocated to each system. For contracts, it's the number of purchase order lines. So there's 20 different ways that we do it, and this is, the best way that we could do it.
Can you go to page 62 for me? So I'm looking at these increases from 20 to 20, 22 to 23 and 23 to 24. And I mean, and they're north of 10%, 16% in from 22 to 23 on the salaries. And then other services are going up 30% in some cases. How can that be?
So these are actually charges that we've already heard. So the bottom is salaries. It's the same salaries we heard earlier in the presentation. This is just the portion that we have to allocate out through we call it the water billing credit. We charge it to electric, and then we give a credit and put it over in water through this accounting procedure. But these are all costs that you've heard throughout the presentation. Like part of them are IT costs that went up for the IT agreements. That's in here.
Okay.
This is just the allocation of costs that you've already heard throughout the presentation.
I still don't like them.
No, I
Well,
totally understandable.
To give a little context here, so we're seeing these numbers grow on the water side more quickly than we are on the electric side. So if you will remember the slide that David Emmanuel was talking about, where we kind of waterfall down over the years, you can see there were a lot more employees added to the water and wastewater system than there was any other group within the organization. So if we could go back to the circle slide. Yes, so you can see the allocated on employee count is at least a couple of those light blue circles. Well, if one group is growing and one group is not, that allocation shifts more, so that water is ending up paying more of that than it was in the past. And so when we showed our electric O&M for 25, we showed it flat. Well, part of the reason that we were able to keep it flat was that there are more costs being shifted over from electric than and into water because of the water system is growing in certain areas faster than the electric system. I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
So here's a stupid question. Looking at this slide, it seems to me that the more shared services, it could be a sign of better efficiency, sort of, right? Or am I missing something here?
The first thing, though, you never ask a stupid question because you got Bobby here.
Chair DeSalvo, exactly what you're saying is there are economies of scale when we have, place like finance is servicing instead of each system having their own finance department and their own HR department, we have one servicing both. So exactly as you said, that it is beneficial.
And it's not, just like what Ted was saying, even though on the chart, it looks like it's a 30% increase. It's not a 30% increase in the shared services. There's more that's now going to water than there was to electric. So that bar chart that you saw are the apportionment to water, not a 30% increase in the services, but now that's what's being charged to water.
Correct. And what we were trying to explain was that O&M cost going up so much more in water than it is in electric. And this is not the only factor, but this is one of the factors that's causing this, is that they are paying more of the what we call shared services than they have been in prior years.
And I don't want to get into this now, but some of this seems like SG&A to me. It just, I mean, look at these circles. Some of the stuff I'd put in SG&A.
Yeah, it is. And this is doesn't affect capital at all. This is all through the O&M. Now, if we have a capital project that is a technology project, an IT project, that project, if it is all for water, right, is an upgrade to our water SCADA system, then water pays for all of it. If there's a project on the electric side that electric all pays for, but these are those projects where are not projects, but just the cost of paying for the cost center with the IT people and finance people, customer service, human resources, et cetera.
Just a question / suggestion. It might be good with this portion of the presentation to see what the savings is that's created by having this sort of setup. So as we speak about these increases that are happening, we would be better able to understand the increases are creating substantial savings for us.
Great question, yeah. What are the synergies?
So that would come with a lot of assumptions, right? I mean, so the budget staff who you've seen and met, they're one of these groups, right? And so if we had a complete budget staff for water and a complete budget staff for electric, how many people would that be? I'm not sure exactly, right? I mean, I some of that would just be a little bit of a roll of the dice to say, okay, well, if I have 10 people in my budget group, would 5 be enough to support electric all by itself? And would 5 be enough to support water all by itself? I'm not sure. So I'm not sure exactly how I could come back to you with something that's just not a made up number. Yeah.
We could certainly model some things. And from an HR standpoint, I can definitely charge them one way or the other.
Yeah, because you
And-
could see
and-
the
and bill
FTE
that.
easily, the FTE
We have-
cost. You could see the cost if you went out to market and you purchased or engaged contracts for these. It may just help. So it's a question / suggestion.
Well, I know, and I'm gonna be naive a little bit, but when you look on the for-profit side of businesses, you do this a lot. I haven't seen us do that kind of modeling, but I think it would be fun to try.
David, I would add that the Business Excellence ITN will address some of these benchmarking statistics to include number of employees. I just know that, having worked at several other mid-sized investor-owned utilities, our finance staff is as lean as any I've ever worked for. It's just and I know TS is probably in the same. So I understand there's questions about this, but I'd say virtually every utility has moved to a shared services type of a organization to control these costs. For the very reason, maybe with the electric, they have several electric utilities. In Nevada, there were two, one in Vegas and one in Reno. There was a shared services staff to accommodate both utilities. So I think we can get into those benchmarking analyses with the consultant that you folks engage.
And that would be acceptable. Not to create additional work for an already lean team. But again, I just think that would help us to digest this better.
We have looked at some high level O&M to revenue ratios, and we're in line with our peers. We haven't done an extensive study on it, but just high level, we're in line, except for a certain utility to the south where I believe they're allocating more O&M to their non-regulated businesses. So some of these numbers are hard to benchmark as well when that's going on, but we're going to be taking a good hard look at it.
I just want to add a little bit about water and wastewater. It is so labor intensive compared to the electric side, much more labor intensive. The other thing is such an aging infrastructure across the United States. Look at Atlanta and what happened in Atlanta with those busted pipes. No water in the city for days. It's a pay me now or pay me later on water right now, all over the country. And it's so capital intensive and O&M intensive, always has been. The other thing is none of us understand shared services sometimes. I'll just tell you that, General DeSalvo, we understand it, but it's always complicated. So Russell did a good job with what he had. It's always hard to understand, but we'll get that with the ITN so we can help explain the savings there.
All right, so our last system to cover is DES, our chilled water. And this system represents 1% of our consolidated operating budget. Here we have our operating revenues. There is an increase of sales of 3,017 ton hours. This results in a 25 revenue of $13.57 million. An increase in 26 and 27 reflects new customers coming online. Here we have.
Are those real customers or projected customers?
Jordan can probably answer better.
They are mainly real. We do have a couple projections.
Good.
As in 2 customer projections. It's such a small number that when I say a couple, it's literally 2.
Here we have our operating budget for DES at $13.57 million, broken down into the operating components. Debt service is projected to be higher than 24 due to the issuance of new debt, and part of the new debt proceeds will be used to pay back outstanding revolver balance. Our current year capital funds partially fund the program, but there will be new debt issuance of $42 million. And then we have our O&M that includes utility and non-utility expenses. Next, we have our treasurer, Randall Barnes.
Thanks again, Lori. As she mentioned, we'll need $42 million. And she also mentioned that part of that is going to be to pay down some revolver drawings that we've had to make to fund the program. I think we currently have about $20 million. I think we did a recent draw on a revolver to move it up from 11 to $20 million drawn on the revolver. And then we expect another $7.5 million by the end of the fiscal year. So we'll be using some of the proceeds from that $42 million issue to pay off the revolver. I think the net increase is about, what is that? I can't do that math. Let's call it 20 million. No, what is that? 15 million. It'll add $2 million of debt service in fiscal year 25. We have a debt ceiling of 150 million, so well below that. DES is a growing business, and so we don't currently track some of our ratios on DES like we do with the other systems. It's still a growing system, so it's going to need some time to mature before we start really looking at things like that. The next slide does layer on the projected borrowing in fiscal year 26. We project another 15 million in fiscal year 26 and currently none in 27. So again, ending up fiscal year 27 with almost $77 million of debt outstanding. Again, well below what we have as our debt ceiling for that business. And my friend Jordan across the way will later in a few minutes give more detail on the projects being done in the system.
So the DES capital budget is set at 18 million. That's a 1.2 million increase from 24 budget. The largest projects in 25 are downtown plant expansion and Hogan's Creek plant expansion and chilled water line extension. The plan will require the new money, as we've discussed, and these capital projects are related to the future growth of this system. And we'll have Jordan Pope with those details.
Thank you, Laura. As you've already heard, the capital plan in the district energy system is mainly driven by growth, and that is concentrated in our plant capacity in order to serve these new loads. So speaking to Hogan's Creek, which Lori has already brought up, that's in the sports and entertainment district. And currently we serve the arena, the baseball stadium, and the Miller Electric Performance Center. And a lot of this capital plan is put together in order to serve future growth in that area, some of which is in development and some of which is already under construction. So this does represent the entirety of the district energy system plan. And again, a lot of that is driven by projects in the sports and entertainment district.
Here's our DES O&M budget. Shown here, it is 6.145 million. For 25, that's an increase of 305,000. The largest component is the services and charges, which includes the utility cost of 4.2 million. On the left are the key items included in the budget. There is 1 million for salaries, benefits, overtime broken down, then the 4.2 million utility, and approximately 500,000 for the non-utility expenses. And back to you, Jordan.
So with the system growth we've been talking about, the DES O&M budget is projected to increase over the next 3 years. And some of the drivers impacting this include, with growth in production due to increased sales, proposed electric and water base rate increases, forecasted fuel rate changes, as well as other non-production costs such as chemicals and salaries and benefits. And while I made a comment about the system perhaps not being very large, I do want to give you a sense of the projected system growth, knowing that the district energy system has been around for about 20 years. However, in the 5-year period between 2023 and 2028, JEA expects contract demand in our system to grow by 41%. So that is the equivalent of adding about 6 main libraries to our system or 2.5 five-star veterans memorial arenas. So that's just a sense of the scope of what it would look like to add 41% to our system.
Are there any questions on DES?
So, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So if our revenue is 12.56 million, what are our real expenses? What's the return here of our investment?
So the way we've looked at the system to date is it was birthed out of the Better Jacksonville plan. And so in the early 2000s, JEA constructed the district energy system in order to serve many of the buildings that you see, including the courthouse across the street, the library, the arena, the baseball stadium. Of course, we serve this building now, the old JEA headquarters, and a few others, including the UF Health campus. For a number of years, the system just existed as it was, and we didn't add a new customer until the early 2020s. However, at one point in time, we purchased 3 plant sites, and we have capacity to add, or we have room rather, to add capacity to those plant sites. And we continue to see a lot of interest in this system because, one, we believe it is a superior product to some of the on-site solutions it provides. We believe in the scenarios that we have run for individual customers, cost savings and efficiencies over time, and it allows us to take advantage of those investments in land that we made 20 years ago in order to build out these plants. So the way we're currently looking at it downtown is we're building out the system, understanding the capacity constraints we will have at the plant. There may be other opportunities to expand the system outside of downtown, because what we find downtown is it is very expensive to expand because of the cost to construct pipes in the right of way. So while we're focused on downtown right now, mainly because that's where the system exists, there are probably better opportunities outside of downtown. And we believe there could be significant benefits to the electric system based on what we have seen other utilities undertake. So we plan to come back, hopefully, to the leadership team and perhaps to the board later this year to help you understand better what that would look like.
No, but what I'm trying to is, I'm asking if revenues are 12.56 million, what are fully loaded expenses and what are we making out of this? I understand that what this does for us. I'm just trying to see it as an economic situation.
You want to take that one? Do you want to provide a little background as to how we raise rates for DES? Because frankly, to Bobby's point, the business was not sustainable based on the way it was priced. And I think the board knows that. So that was the impetus for rate increases recently.
That's correct. So the board raised, at the recommendation of staff, the rates significantly a few years ago because this system was not in a good spot. And so what we're looking at now is we want to add, to Mr. Stein's point, we want to add load that is positive to the system. So we're not looking to add just any customer. We want to add customers that are positive to the system and over time provide benefits. So right now what you're seeing is some capital investment, and relative to the revenues, it may not be immediately positive. However, over time, adding these larger loads, it will be a positive benefit to the system. I will acknowledge that you do not have the scale of our electric or water system in the district energy system. That I do not believe will ever exist. However, I think it goes back to the system was birthed in order to accomplish some larger community objectives. And I think it is still the case that we are helping some of the developments downtown achieve those objectives. But I will acknowledge that it is always worth having the conversation of the merit of the district energy system being under the purview of JEA.
But I'm not trying to be difficult, but the revenues are 12.56 million in 24. What are the fully loaded expenses? I'm just, I'm not saying it's not a good deal or not a good investment. I'm just trying to understand it.
We have a long-range forecast that Julie's folks have put together, Bobby, but Breaker, we haven't focused on that for the purposes of bringing that before the board. I think we need to, though. It's a great suggestion. I do know the model set up around achieving the minimum debt service coverage levels. So it looks like there's a lot of capital. There is a lot of capital spend, but remember, Randall's Group's financing that over 30 years. So on the debt service side, but to your point, we do have a long-range forecast that we certainly can bring before the board.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the debt and looking at the revenue. What are the fully loaded expenses? And my question, Vicki, is if it's a long-term value to the community, I think it's worth looking at, even if we're losing money, but we just should know that. That's, I guess, my point.
So,
yeah.
Jordan, if I heard you right, did you say that expanding in the urban core will be expensive? Because and maybe I misunderstood, but I'm thinking if some of these initiatives come through, say the TRIO, initiative or whatever, we finally start seeing some of these things, it looks like a great opportunity to expand, this type of capability. But are we sort of hamstrung by it's easier said than done?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. Relative to a greenfield development, it is expensive to install mains in the crowded rights of ways that you find in downtown. So when we build these chilled water connections, it's 2 pipes, supply and return. So you're already putting in 2 pipes that you have to fit into these rights of ways with a lot of older utilities that already exist. And that's a lot of where the cost drivers are coming from. To Mr. Stein's point earlier, if it's of community benefit, it may be worth incurring that cost depending on the number of connections, the breadth of the connections that you could make. But what we are seeing in the broader industry is a move to a campus-style district energy system where you're serving a very large customer at a single site, and you're not incurring these significant costs that come with right-of-way extension.
Well, I would suggest that before we go spending millions and millions of more dollars, we take a deep dive into this, because first of all, in my view, it's inexcusable not to be able to answer the question of whether it's profitable or whether it's losing money. And we may think it's doing a benefit for the community, and the customers, not coincidentally, are all public entities that have no choice but to use it. And the ones that have a choice to use it don't use it. I mean, that's sort of ringing a bell in my head. And I think, there's nothing we can do about what was done in the past, but we sure don't need to expand a loser.
I just don't understand. It was a majorness for the day. I don't understand. We had some good thoughts about deep dive and say, where are we today? Totally invested, no looking back, or this is an opportunity to take a fresh look, reallocate dollars.
That's what that deep dive can help us take a look in. Yeah. Any other questions?
So for our last slide, this really concludes our workshop for today. At the board meeting, we'll give a brief overview of our budget again for all the board members and to review that 25 budget for your review and approval. I would like to thank my team, operating budget, capital budget, the rates team, for all the work to put this together. But even more importantly, all the presenters and the collaboration across the organization. As you can see, it took everyone in JEA to prepare this presentation for you today. And I wanted to say thank you.
Well, I wanted to thank everybody that put the effort. This was well done. I hope I didn't ask too many questions.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, but thank everybody for the effort. It was very well put together. Thank you.
Yeah, this, again, Lori, great job, and everybody on the staff here. This was very, very illuminating. A lot of good takeaways. I think the other thing too, this gives us some good deep dive focus with the ITN too, that we sort of, it will help that process too. But just great work by everybody. Any comments from the board members at all, or any last minute?
Mr. Chair, if I might,
Please.
just, and try not to say much as I understand my role here, but I did want to, first of all, commend staff and the great work. But more importantly, the drill down that the board members do, it gives me a great deal of confidence to be able to go back to my colleagues and talk about the due diligence that happens in meetings like this, because there are challenges ahead of us. I would strongly encourage Vicki, once the new administration and the council turnover happens next month, that she make a point of hooking up with the TEU chair and coming over and talking about some of this. As we get into the budget time and understanding that, getting leapfrogging that process to communicate to the committee, I think would be probably wise to do it, and finance as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Vicki.
Well, I'd just like to say a lot of effort went into this first workshop for the board, a lot of effort, a lot of deep dive internally to lower the cost. Staff worked very, very hard. And it's also the first time we've done a 3-year projection. So not only are you seeing next year's, but the next 2 years to hopefully lay the groundwork when we come back next year and the year after. That's never been done, and I think it showed great foresight. And I just want all of the finance team to stand up and be acknowledged, if you don't mind. Griffin in the back, Sarah, everybody who worked on this, and Lori, and Victor. I mean, JEA has a very strong finance team. I just can't say enough about how good they are. And I appreciate your appreciation of them and very much appreciate the diligence of this board. So thank you.
And then just one thing I want to add is, again, what would have been bad is if we went through 3 hours and no questions at all. So thank you for spurring the questions, to get us thinking too. And I sincerely mean that. That was good, a very productive session. Any new business before we adjourn here? Our next board meeting will be the 25th of June at 9 o'clock. And that's, thank you very much. Okay, how does that work?
Well, we have lunch for the board members if you'd like to have lunch, and it's out in the hallway. Is that what I was supposed to say, Melissa? So I guess you can slam your gavel because it's time to eat.
Thanks.
Thank y'all.
Remind me to stay on your good side.
I know, it occurred to me that I was shooting the messenger.
You know,